Hello, and welcome to the Charmed Life podcast. This podcast is on YouTube and it is on any of your podcast outlets. And on this show, we talk about magic, metaphysics, mysticism, the unconditional love of the universe, spiritual topics, personal development topics. I am your host, Tricia Carr. I'm a multidimensional channel and medium, animal communicator, spiritual teacher, and I'm also a hypnotherapist, which plays a lot into this. And with all that I get to do, I just love to share with you guys and all of the learning and exploration that I am doing. I just want to shine it with you guys. As I said, I'm a spiritual teacher, and really, as a spiritual teacher, I'm a spiritual learner because teach learning, learn teaching are two sides of the same coin. Well, some of these episodes, if you're new here, you'll find me just teaching on my own, sharing and teaching, and some others having a conversation with another guest expert. And that's what this episode is. On this episode, I'm speaking with Mark Anthony, who is the psychic lawyer, also called the psychic explorer, because he is he's into archaeological digs and all kinds of super interesting stuff. Mark Anthony also likes to talk about quantum physics. I mean, he's asked to speak on quantum physics, history, and really just such a broad spectrum of knowledge, interest, and insight. He is the author of two books. One is called Never Letting Go, and the other one is Evidence of Eternity. And he's really just so genuine. In this episode, he shares a really beautiful story, which I will not spoil for you. And it's just a really wonderful conversation. We spent a lot of time together, and I hope you enjoy it too. So without any more delay, enjoy this episode with Mark Anthony, the psychic lawyer. Welcome to the show, Mark Anthony. I'm really excited to have you on. I heard about you a while ago. I believe were you on a show at UBN, Universal Broadcasting Network, maybe Tony Sweet's show, Truth Be Told?
I was, yeah. Tony, I consider Tony a very good friend.
Yes, I thought I'd heard about you from Tony. That's right.
Yeah, he's a great guy, and I love his show, Truth Be Told.
Mm-hmm.
It pushes the envelope, which I always enjoy. So thank you for having me on your show.
Oh, my pleasure. I've co-hosted on Tony's show a couple of times, and I used to have my podcast at UBN. So everyone go check out UBN, Universal. It's actually called UBN Go now, Universal Broadcasting Network, and lots of great shows on there. And so maybe you'll catch Mark Anthony there sometime too. So you are the psychic lawyer and a psychic explorer. You just have such a fascinating body of work. So I'm going to just turn it over to you and let everybody know what your journey is or what the work is that you have been doing and are doing.
Well, there's never a day that I don't have something to do, which I'm very thankful for. And my journey, I can sum it up in 5 points. And what it is, Tricia, this was presented to me from the other side. Mm. And what had happened is that I was born with the ability to communicate with spirits. Mm-hmm. And both my parents had these abilities as well. So this runs in the family. Mm-hmm. And I was practicing law, and my mother, who was a medium, we were very close, and she passed unexpectedly. Although it was weird because the day before I knew something was wrong. It's like something didn't feel good in the energy field. Right. And I remember I was at my law office and I kept thinking, I'd really like to eat spaghetti for lunch. And all of a sudden I just pick up the phone and I call my mom, and she goes, "Oh, hey, honey, I made spaghetti. Why don't you come over for lunch?" And I'm like, okay, which is very typical the way my family always has been. So I remember going over and we had a really great time. And I was talking to her, and my dad was, mom and dad, we had lunch, and she looked kind of tired. And I had a feeling it was just one of those things. And as I was leaving, I'll never forget this, Tricia. She came up to me and Mom, she put her hands on my shoulders and she looked me right in the eye and she said, "I'm so lucky that you have been my son. I love you so much." And I got kind of teary-eyed and I hugged her and I says, "I love you too, Mom." And that was the last I ever saw her. I was in court the next day, and it was one of those days when I got up and it was like something wasn't right. I just felt off. And I'm in court, and the judge's assistant came into the courtroom, and she went like this. She goes, "Mark, you need to come into chambers right now." And I was like, I knew it wasn't good. And then that was the call that that mom had passed. And naturally, you know, my entire family spiraled into grief and sadness, which is very normal. We were a very tight-knit family. And what happened was about a week, maybe 10 days after her physical death, I was driving in my car, and all of a sudden I knew I needed to pull over. So I pulled off, it was one of the main roads in the town where I live, and I pulled into some strip mall, and I'm sitting there in the driver's seat, and all of a sudden this flash goes off. It was like, was it a flash of light, or was it in my head? It was just this, all of a sudden, this brilliant white light for like a second. And I turned to look at the passenger side, and I saw my mother's silhouette in this silver white light. And I realized, okay, this is like some major. And all of a sudden I hear her voice, and she said, "Mark, you have been given the gift of mediumship so that you would not be crushed by grief, but now you must help those who are suffering with theirs." And then it hit me, a 5-point message. God exists. Heaven exists. Our soul is an immortal living spirit. We can communicate with those souls, and when it is our time to leave this world, we'll be reunited with them in the light. And it all hit me at once. And I'm sitting there in my car, and I was overwhelmed. I was absolutely flabbergasted, immersed in grief, immersed in joy. It was just so many different emotions and feelings. But I realized that that was one of those pivotal moments in life. And so that's been my journey, is to help people that understand that we are just temporarily living in the material world, but there is something beyond this existence, and it is wonderful.
Wow, that's really beautiful. I was stricken by the language that she accidentally used. You have been.
Yeah,
my son.
When I look back on that, well, now I know what was going on, because after she passed, my mother's best friend, Nancy, also a medium, and Nancy and I have turned out to be great friends. And she said to me about 2 weeks before my mom passed, she met, mom called her up. My mom's name was Jean. So Jean calls up Nancy. She says, "I want to meet you for lunch." And I think they went to Bennigan's. And Nancy said, "I saw your mom coming in, and she looked very frail, and the hostess helped her to the table." And my mom said to her, she goes, "Nancy, I don't have long to live. Wow. I know my time is coming." And she said, "And I know Mark is going to take it hardest of all, so you have to be there for him." And Nancy was like, "Jean, how can you say that?" She goes, "Nancy, I know." So my mother knew that something was going on. And what had happened when she passed is she passed in her sleep very peacefully. And we should all be so fortunate.
Yes.
She died from what's known as a ventricular fibrillation. And that's when the electrical system in your heart simply gives out. And you know, every cardiologist I've talked to has always said to me, if you ever consign like how you want to go, that's how you want to go, because what happens is you get very, very tired and you want to lay down, you go to sleep, and then you just drift off. And so there are many, many ways that people leave this material world. And that certainly was a peaceful passing. But she knew, and people know their bodies. I mean, you know, it's like, you know, when you're not feeling good, you have an off day or something. And she knew that something was going on, and she knew that the end was near. And I remember her saying to my brother and I, she said, "You know, I've been sick a lot in my life, and I just don't want tubes in my nose, any more IVs. I don't want to die like that." So now that I have the ability to reflect and look back on it, she earned a peaceful passing. And she didn't die in the hospital on a respirator with IVs and all of that. And so that that is, Tricia, part of what has opened up this door for me to fully accept and embrace the gifts or the abilities that I was born with, and now use them to help people who are suffering with their grief.
Mm. So beautiful. I'm pretty, I'm very emotional right now, doing my best not to ruin my makeup.
I know I'm getting all teary-eyed, because we all have to face grief. We all do.
Yeah.
At some point in our life, nobody wants to lose a loved one, and nobody wants to go on the journey of grief. But unfortunately, it's a road we're flung down at some point in our life, whether we like it or not. And it does happen to everyone. No one is immune from it. It is the great equalizer. But it also doesn't need to be a reason to destroy your life. Certainly it is crippling emotionally, and it's especially for parents who've lost children, is just the
beyond
most insidious loss. It's just terrible. But death and the pain that it causes can also be a motivating influence for you to engage in a new spiritual journey, to discover your path in life, and to reconnect with the divine power that we call God. However, there's other people, and I was a prosecutor and criminal defense attorney, and certainly as a medium, I've seen people who choose the other path of drugs, alcohol, impulsive behaviors as a form of self-medication to distract and redirect their attention. And unfortunately, that path never has a good outcome.
It's never pleasurable. It's a false pleasure. And even, certain drugs, they actually don't give, like, for example, cocaine. What it actually does is increase dopamine. And dopamine isn't actually a pleasure chemical. It's a expectation chemical. So that's why people on coke are always like, it's going to be a great night. You know what I mean? So there's like a lot of, that's just one example. But with substances, it's a lot of false pleasures. And it creates more suffering than pleasure, as well as any other of those negative behaviors, crime or something.
Sure. They're all looking for that high.
Yeah.
It's like people that you can be addicted to food, you can be addicted to sugar, caffeine, heroin, stealing things, sex. I mean, it's all this quick fix because it's an attempt to distract things. It's funny when you said cocaine, living in Florida, certainly, Florida is a conduit for a lot of the drugs coming up from Central America. And this teenager, he's a movie star actor, that I know. His mother's my publicist in LA. And he said, I really got to get up for this part. Do you think, maybe if I tried cocaine, that would help? And I said, let me tell you something. If you want to go nowhere really fast in life, cocaine's the drug for you, because it will destroy your life in no time flat. Yeah. And he's like, oh, okay. So.
Good for him that he has you to tell him that before it actually happened.
I know his parents are like, "What? Where did he come up with this?" Well, because he's a kid and he hears, "Oh, Coke's cool." It's like, no, Coke isn't cool. Guess what's even just as not cool as crystal meth and heroin and all of them. Really, it's I've seen so many people, in Lord of the Rings. All right, we've all seen Lord of the Rings, probably. Gollum sitting in the cave with the ring, going, "My precious." Yeah. Well, it's interesting that Peter Jackson and the production team of Lord of the Rings, they modeled Gollum's physical characteristics on a 65-year-old heroin addict.
Wow.
Oh. And if you think about it, and I've seen this with a lot of clients, when you become addicted to something like that, and like Gollum, he was addicted to the ring, which is a symbol of addiction and self-destruction and pure ego. And so when you get involved in behaviors like that, you lose your family, you lose your friends, your employee. What do you end up with? Sitting alone, usually in the dark, because they want to sleep all night. They don't like the light, with your precious, whether it's cocaine, crystal meth, or what have you. Yeah. So it's very important to realize that turning to these quick fix, feel good sensations is not how to deal with life's problems. And the sooner we confront them and endure the pain, the sooner we're on the road to recovery.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and so I imagine having the confluence of being the medium, psychic medium, and working in the legal system, that's quite a extreme dichotomy. I mean, really, the worlds that you are mingling in.
It certainly can be. For a long time, I was acting both as an attorney and working as a medium.
Mm-hmm.
And it got to the point where I realized that the door to my spiritual journey had been open and I'd been shoved through it. Okay. Because a lot of people are like, well, what's my purpose in life? Well, sometimes the door flings open and they kick you in the butt right through it and off you go. And I realized that as much as I had enjoyed and benefited from the practice of law, that it was time to take that skill set, my speaking ability, my writing ability, my ability to explain things, and hopefully the empathy that the skills of empathy and sympathy that I've learned in counseling people through all sorts of horrific things that had happened to them, and put all my energy into my work as a medium and a public speaker and an author. And I've never once regretted that decision, but I still keep a hand in law as a legal analyst. I'm on a lot of TV and radio shows. I become the go-to guy, as it were, for when the legal system and the paranormal collide, which strangely enough, Tricia, happens more than people might think.
Very cool. We want to know about all of those. Let's just start reviewing the cases right now.
Well, remember a few years ago, Slender Man, there was this website called Creepypasta. And they created this character that was supposed to be this like shadowy figure, a supernatural being. And these deluded teenage girls actually believed that Slender Man existed, and that if they murdered a friend of theirs as a sacrifice to
this is real? This sounds like
totally real.
It sounds like a horror movie. That's crazy.
They stabbed this poor kid, and thankfully she survived. She managed to get away, and they were arrested, and of course the trial was going on. And several shows had me on discussing, this type of phenomenon. Also, when there is demonic possession, or people claim demonic possession as a defense to first-degree murder. Then there's been cases where people buy a house, and all of a sudden the house turns out to be haunted, and then they want to have the contract overturned in court. So there's all types of things that come up, and because of my background as both an attorney and as a psychic medium, that's why I become the go-to guy. I've done a number of appearances on Coast to Coast AM, and they always want me to talk about haunted real estate. In other words, do things that go bump in the night bump up or down your property value? And you'd be surprised how sometimes having a haunted reputation is really good for business.
And do you have to, I think in real estate, I think I've heard that you have to divulge if there's been a murder or a suicide in the property. Does it also, if it's suspected to be haunted, is any of that true, that you have to divulge that as the seller?
It depends on the jurisdiction.
Okay, sure.
There are certain events that occur at a property which can stigmatize the property. So stigmatized property statutes require the seller to disclose things. I think, there's about a third of the states require that you, like if somebody died in the house, particularly of suicide or murder, if the house, normally with stigmatized property, it's like, did the house have termites or is there water damage?
That's a problem. That's what I would be concerned about.
That's a real problem. But now in some states, it's been extended to if it has a haunted reputation. And there's a couple states that do require that, which I think is fascinating.
It's weird.
Well, a stigmatized property will sell for roughly 6% below market value. In other words, similarly situated properties will go for 6% more than one that's stigmatized. And so that's why those things have to be disclosed. There is a case that the case is Stambalski, I think versus New York. I'm trying to remember the actual name of it. But it's known as the Stambalski case. Here's what happened. Somebody sold a house, and the buyer of the house started realizing that strange things were going on in the house, and then discovered that the seller used to conduct haunted tours there and charge people money to go to this haunted house, and did not disclose that fact. And so it ended up in court, and it went up to the New York Supreme Court. And this is a very difficult situation, because for a judge to say or to rule that this house is haunted is a government proclamation that there is some type of spiritual entity, and therefore there's an afterlife, therefore it violates separation of church and state.
Yeah.
Okay, so there's a lot going on there. But the judge is very clever, and they said, well, the haunted reputation. So they got around saying that there are definitely spirits in an afterlife and a hell and a heaven and all that. Instead, the ruling of the court was that this must be disclosed, and because the seller was profiting from the haunted reputation, that was the type of material fact that the buyer needed to know. So therefore, the contract for the sale of the house was set aside. So the Stambalski versus, I think it's Bowers or Ackers, it's something like that. I could look it up real quick, but the Stambalski case is the biggie. There have been others too. One that actually ended up in the People's Court. It occurred in Toms River, New Jersey, where these people moved into a house they were renting and then claimed that there was poltergeist activity and it was making their teenage daughter crazy, and then all these things were going on. And so they wanted their money back, and went to the People's Court, and it ruled in favor of the landowner, because they even brought on a paranormal team that did a whole check of the house to see if it was haunted, and they didn't turn up anything. It appeared that, and it was funny because one of the commentators said, a teenage girl acting strangely.
Yeah, I was haunted as a teen. I was haunted too, y'all. What teenager's not haunted?
Yeah, exactly. I remember, especially in my house when I was growing up, my parents maybe saw spirits, but, teenagers are very unique, and it's a difficult time for a lot of kids. And when you're going through the transition from being a child to an adult, and then the hormonal changes and things going on. So even under the best of circumstances, raising a teenager is challenging.
Well, I think that the Stambalski case, I think that they handled it well. I would say that they need the court system needs to stay in their lane. They need to not be, in the spiritual or religious or any kind of, personal belief system. And anyway, there needs to be a division there. And I think that's a practical way to look at it. That we're talking about what is believed to have gone on there, the reputation, whether it could be resold and all of that. So it makes sense to me that they circumvented the judgment as to whether there was actually spiritual activity.
Well, recently, the Satanist Church has filed suit against the state of Mississippi, because the state of Mississippi is changing their flag. The flag has the Confederate flag as part of it.
Yeah, wait, they are changing it? Because literally last week I heard they were still not changing it. So have I missed some news reports?
They're going to change it. It's going up for a vote. And part of the motto of the state of Mississippi, and I think it's incorporated in the flag, says, "In God we trust." And the Satanists say, well, that's offensive to us. And of course, the Christian right wing is jumping in on this. But the Satanists, and I am no fan of Satanists, I'm going on record, okay, but they did provide a valid point. What if they said, that this was in their argument, "In Satan we trust"? Okay. Now, if that were what was on the Mississippi flag, who would find that objectionable. And pretty much I'd say 99% of America, but also there's the atheists and there's the Hindus and the Buddhists, both of which do believe in a greater power. That's the problem that I have with the so-called religious liberty laws, because they're not liberty. It is the advancement of Christianity over other religions.
Exactly.
Because if it were the, let's say it was an Islamic school or a mosque that was seeking the federal funding or seeking protection for their religious practices, I have a hard time believing that our politicians would be hop-toing and saying, oh, we got to have this religious liberty.
Right.
The reason that the founding fathers, and once again, they're very flawed too. A number of them, including George Washington and Thomas Jefferson, did own slaves, but they were also students of history. Thomas Jefferson, John Adams, who was vehemently opposed to slavery. He was he was from Massachusetts. You had James Monroe, you had Patrick Henry, you had the founding fathers there. And so the men that put together the Constitution had been observing the last 1,000 years of European religious warfare. Catholics against Protestants, Christians against Muslims, one version of Catholicism against the other. Right. And with the possible exception of Holland at that time, every country in Europe had a religious head of state. And so that religion and politics were so closely intertwined. They saw how in Britain, Catholics were ruthlessly punished by Protestants. And then in Ireland, how it wasn't so much religious doctrine as it was, if you were Protestant, you're on this side of the political fence. If you were Catholic, on the other. Then it saw the Protestant League engaged in wars against the Catholic countries. And they reasoned that it would be in America's best interest if church and state were separated, and that the government could not and would not interfere in the free exercise of religions, and conversely, that religion would not dictate policy to the government. And that was a very, very bold and courageous step, extremely progressive for the horse and buggy era.
Totally. So the context of them putting just "in God we trust," that was mild. You know what I mean? So at that time, that was very agnostic to make it as simple as that, because they had this radical shift, just instituting separation of church and state. They were just getting accustomed to it. And now the line has changed. The context has changed. Cultures have changed. We are more of a melting pot. So it's time to change some things, right? It's time to update a lot of this stuff. It's amazing to me that we have certain systems that are still operating, but the systems are anachronistic to how we actually live now. It's wild to me, and that's what's creating a lot of this upheaval and clashing, is some of these old ideals, which we are no longer really, truly, for the most part, comfortable with. They haven't totally been killed off yet,
and they should be. I don't know, we're taking a turn, but the
I know, right?
I live in Florida.
I think it's the time for this kind of talk.
I'm bi-coastal. I'm in California a lot, but since the quarantine hit, I'm in Florida. The Confederate flag, I see people, it's heritage, not hate. Yeah, but if I'm German and I'm wearing a swastika, right? Okay, is that heritage, not hate?
Besides that, that's a really good example, because the swastika was, the Nazis weren't the first ones to use it. So they adopted it from an even older context, but that's what it's associated with now. So it, you know what I mean? Correct. Like it's much older than them, but that's what we know. It was symbol.
Exactly. It was like really cool.
Right.
And Hitler was an artist, albeit a lousy one, but he was part of it, and he thought that was a nice design, and they put it the black swastika on a red white circle on a red background, so it mimicked the colors of imperialist World War I Germany. But they took a symbol of peace and turned it into a symbol of aggression and hate. Right. Now, if I'm an African American and I see a Confederate flag, and we have to keep in mind that the Confederacy tried to destroy the United States of America by
Right.
seceding. And even though Robert E. Lee was an incredible tactician and great strategist, he was working to destroy the United States of America. That's what their objective was. And it wasn't until around 1900 when a number of Southern writers began to glamorize and romanticize the South as the underdog fighting for their way of life.
Right.
And henceforth, Gone with the Wind and all of these other writings. Whereas if you look at the writings of somebody like Samuel Clemens, Mark Twain, who lived in that era as well, he did not glamorize slavery. Of course, he was an intellectual of the first order. And so there's this take on this that somehow the South was this elegant society, but in reality, it was a brutal slave state.
Yeah.
And it was trying to destroy the United States of America. And I'm sure that I'll probably get a bunch of hateful comments on Facebook and other places for saying this. But you know what? It's time to take a stand. And what we have to realize is we're Americans. And the United States flag stands for truth, justice, and equality for all. We are a work in progress. We have a long way to go. And it is time for us to let these arcane ideas of racism rooted in a 19th century war, a century before last, time to let it go. Let's move on.
Amen. And the spiritual implications of this, again, is old ideals, old thought forms arresting us. It's interesting. We started with haunted houses, and that's actually what we're talking about. It's like we're haunted with these ghosts that really don't need to exist anymore, and we have the empowerment to just not have them be here anymore. And that's what haunted houses are. You know what I mean? Like people are, all we need is a little education. People just need a little education. It's like, yeah, okay, so there are some spirits here, but you're physical, you're a person, and you can just tell them to leave, and you can run light, you can run that higher frequency, and they don't get to be here and bother you. But people don't know that. They're afraid of it. We have all this superstition. Right. It's an exact parallel, though.
They give into it. It's fear.
Fear.
I mean, it's time to be on the right side of history. Yeah. Our politicians, our Supreme Court. I mean, I was very happy to see the United States Supreme Court finally rule that you cannot be fired from a job if you're a member of the LGBT community. Okay. But it was a 7-2 decision. Shame on the two justices, Clarence Thomas and what's his name, Kavanaugh. Okay, first off, Clarence Thomas, shame on you.
Right.
You're an African-American man married to a white woman. Guess what? That was a felony until the United States Supreme Court, in the case of Loving versus Virginia, declared that was unconstitutional.
And that was only in the 60s, by the way. That was in the 60s. I don't remember what the date is. But that's what I'm talking about. And by the way, the people who are in charge of things still, they that only happened in the 60s. In their heyday, it was illegal still. So I don't mean to condemn all people of a certain age group, but some of the people who are still hanging on to those old ghosts are still in power and still running all of the things. Sorry to interrupt, but yeah, that's an excellent example.
You're absolutely, and it's a beautiful analogy that you're making, Tricia, that hanging on to these ideals of racial superiority and hatred. For God's sakes, the Civil War ended 150 plus years ago. It's time to let it go. People say, but Robert E. Lee was a hero. Well, my father's family came from Pennsylvania. They didn't think so. And if you think he's a hero, then why don't we erect a statue of Benedict Arnold in the Capitol building?
Exactly. Yes, and there's just so much that I think the reason we're kind of led to talk about these things is the climate is so it's really painful right now, and what do we do? But on the spiritual side of it, I think it is as simple as we have some ghosts that we need to send to the light, and we're also seeing people needing to cling to old identities. because they don't have self-empowerment, because they don't know that they have the essence of God within them. And so we're all trained to have authority outside of ourselves. And this is a big problem that just creates more separation. And then that starts to create blame, shame, and guilt and judgment. And that's the chaos. And that's at the root of all of this pain. That's at the root of the issues of race. It's just separation and superiority because of some identity.
It is. And, it's fine. But there's another way of looking at all this. Of course, the COVID crisis is just horrific, and we could talk quite a bit about that. Mm-hmm. It gave us an opportunity, which apparently has slipped through our fingers, because for the first time in human history, all the medical and scientific experts around the world are working in concert. Okay, let's find a cure for this. Let's find a vaccine. Let's find a treatment. And for the time that everybody was in lockdown, all of a sudden the air started getting cleaner.
Yeah, I know.
Woods started to regrow. The oceans were cleaner. It showed us that if we put our brain trust, the planetary brain trust together, mm-hmm. that we could come up with alternative forms of energy, or a way to utilize the fossil fuels in a much cleaner, more environmentally sane manner. Mm-hmm. And I just read a report that since there was a lockdown in Italy, the Mediterranean Sea all around Italy is much more alive, cleaner, and healthier than it has been in centuries. Right. So we were given a glimpse of what if we put our scientists not just to work on finding a solution to COVID, but also on our problems with pollution, with food production, with making this planet cleaner, instead of putting our scientists to work and figuring ways to kill each other, mm-hmm. we really could advance. And that doesn't mean that, because humans, we're not all going to join hands and sing Kumbaya, but we need to learn to respect each other's boundaries and mm-hmm. stay out of each other's boundaries. But we had the chance. We were given that. Let's hope that it wasn't entirely for nothing.
Yeah, it was kind of lovely and also really sad when we were seeing those improvements in the environment in the initial lockdown, because I'm sorry, I felt so pessimistic, but are we going to learn? Are we going to then, here's another thing with the clashing of time and timelines even, because you and I are right now meeting remotely. We are connecting with one another, and, it would have been a waste if you took an airplane here and all of that fossil fuel. You know what I mean? That's a waste for what we're doing. And I used to, my old job, my old career, they would send me on, to drive down to San Diego. It's like a 2-hour drive. It's 4 hours round trip for a 10-minute meeting. And I was saying to them, because I'd already started my spiritual career, I was like, you guys, I can just do like a video meeting. And no, we have to do. And I'm like, well, it's your dime. But the thing is, I was all of the pollution just for something so frivolous. Yes. And so again, we have information. We're not just in the information age with the industrial age, and we're doing too much of the same thing. These timelines and these ideals and these ways of being are colliding, and that's what is breaking. And we actually have to move all of that into the intuition age, because the model of us meeting remotely is the model of us communicating with spirit. It's a spiritual technology. It's just us trying to remind ourselves of that.
Well, it is. Mm-hmm. And that's the other thing, since the COVID crisis, how many people are utilizing technology mm-hmm. to communicate with each other. Like I said, with the show, yes, I would have loved to have joined you in LA, but we're able to essentially accomplish the same thing here with minimal or no environmental impact. Right. And, we have to respect Mother Earth. Mm-hmm. I've had the honor in my life of meeting some astronauts. I met John Glenn. Mm-hmm. I've met Neil Armstrong, first man to walk on the moon. Buzz Aldrin, second man to walk on the moon. I met Captain Mike Foreman. That was a funny story. Who's a space shuttle pilot. And there's a former Florida Senator, Bill Nelson, who was actually on a space shuttle. And what's really cool about them, Tricia, is they're very different people, but they all said the same thing in one way or another. when you're in space and you look down at Earth and you see how beautiful it is.
Mm.
It's like, they're like talking about the moon. Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin are like, how cool it was to be on the moon. It's like, imagine that. But the moon essentially, it's a dead rock. Okay. I mean, it's a dead rock. And then you look at Earth and you can like see and feel the life from it and realize that is the only place we have to live.
Mm-hmm.
And yet we deforest it. We pollute the oceans. We just do these horrifying things to this planet. And then there's all these countries that just have this lust to develop nuclear weapons.
It doesn't make any sense.
But that's why I wish we could get somebody with that type of vision,
mm-hmm.
leading more than one country, that this is the only place we have to live, and we need to respect Mother Earth.
Mm-hmm. What do you think about, because I know you are also, you speak on quantum physics as well, and you just have such a wide array of knowledge and such a birth of information and consideration, philosophies and knowledge. And so what do you think in the spiritual perspective, or what can we do about, I'm thinking about the population. Sometimes I look at the population from 30 years ago or 50 years ago and how exponentially it's increasing. So is that something that's really a concern, or is there anything like in a timeline spiritual sense that we should be looking at or being concerned about? What are the implications, maybe? Does that make sense? Yeah.
I understand exactly
mm-hmm.
what you're saying. I haven't received any messages per se about the overpopulation of this planet. However, the spirit world, the other side, is more than well aware of this.
Mm-hmm.
And it's been fascinating because in all the readings that I've been doing since February of this year, I'd say in 95% of them, COVID comes up. Mm. In fact, yesterday I was doing a reading for somebody, and I think it was her great aunt, who she was very close to, came through. And I said, your great aunt is showing me this bathtub. That's one of those, it's the one that's like standing in the middle of a room with a ball and claws, one of those old fashioned. And she goes, yeah, I know that bathtub. My neighbors, they're actually redoing their bathroom, but they want to keep the old fashioned ball and claw. And I go, COVID alert, COVID alert, COVID alert. Oh. Kept coming through. And the client says, it was a phone reading. And she says, oh my God. She said they actually had to stop all of the renovation work because one of the workers tested positive for COVID-19. And now our neighbors, their kids, their whole family all have to be tested. So apparently, her great auntie from the other side was saying, you need to stay clear of these people.
Oh, wow.
Because of a COVID alert. And so the spirit realm is more than well aware of this.
Yeah. And
the really sad part is that Mother Nature may be striking back in a sense.
Mm-hmm. I posted a meme that I created or something when, all of those stats about how everything has improved, the canals in Venice and the skies over Tokyo and everything. And she's fighting back. I said, if we back the fuck off, she can heal herself. So I'm with you.
Well, nature is a way of thinning the herd. And I don't mean to sound like Thomas Malthus or in any way as a social Darwinist, because, to date, as the date of this recording, over 130,000 people in the United States have died from this. And yet there are people who insist this is a hoax.
I don't understand that at all. Do they think that somehow people aren't dying from a virus? There's no logic in that to me.
It is a distract and redirect. It's like what you do with I'm a
hypnotherapist.
That's throwing a temper tantrum. You distract and redirect.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
And it's really quite sad. Yes, I'm a medium, but I'm also a science guy.
Yeah.
And I remember a couple months ago watching Neil deGrasse Tyson. He said, listen to the scientists. He said, I'm an astrophysicist, not an epidemiologist, but you have to listen to the scientists. we have to quarantine, we have to social distance, and we have to do it until the middle of June. That's what they're telling us. And then the numbers will come down. Well, surprisingly, that's what Angela Merkel has ordered in Germany. And the Germans appear to have this under control because that's what we need to do. And this rush to open economy, money is very short-sighted, because in the long run, it's going to cost us a lot more, not just in money, but in human lives. And
the other distraction,
there's karmic repercussions to all of this. And this is not a hoax. This is a disease, and human history is filled with pandemics and plagues.
Right.
It is just part of our history. And to ignore this as if it will go away or as if it's fabricated is a serious mistake.
Well, the other distraction that is happening is that somehow it has become political, partisan. It's not partisan. It's no respecter of people. So that's also just another wild distraction, to think that somehow that you are Republican or Democrat if you take care of yourself in the quarantine, you know what I mean? Like in the pandemic. And if you take care of others in the pandemic, it's so illogical to me, which boggles my Capricorn moon understanding of things.
Yeah, it's really quite pathetic that a disease is being politicized.
Doesn't make any sense at all.
This. Well, what people have to realize is that COVID-19, the coronavirus, is not a bigot. It'll kill anybody.
That's what I'm saying.
It doesn't discriminate. It'll kill a Republican just as easily as it will kill a Democrat. Exactly. And it doesn't care who you are, it will kill you. And the people say, well, most of the people who have it get over it. Well, I have a friend in LA who's a big, buff, tough actor. Okay, he's like he's like one of those guys who go up, like, strike a match on his chest and he's just, and he got it 3 months ago, and he said he's still hacking up this really creepy looking stuff and bringing up blood because it damaged his lungs so badly. So yes, you can survive it, but until there are proper treatments and a vaccine, and then there's the vaccine, Bill Gates is trying to inject a chip in you, and it's like.
Yes, because he's been accused of eugenics and that he wants to sterilize all of us. I don't even know how that happened. Maybe because of something similar to what I just said. Do we have to be concerned about the overpopulation? That's probably what then spun that out of control, I'm assuming, but I don't know.
Yeah, it's here I'm taking a stand. Wear a mask.
Yes.
Social distance. Okay. Wash your hands.
Right here.
Use your common sense. Exactly. I've got my N95 mask in the next room. I'm here by myself today, so I don't have to, quarantine inside. But the thing is, on the upside, we can learn a lot of lessons about stopping the spread of contagion. People say, well, the flu kills people. Well, guess what? If you wear a mask, wash your hands, and social distance during flu season, you're going to flatten the curve and decrease the contagion on that too. Because the flu, the coronavirus, the common cold, strep throat, certain pneumonias all spread in a very similar fashion. So it's like I've spent a lot of time in Japan. When people are sick in Japan, they wear a mask.
Yeah.
Okay. They wash their hands. Notice how Japan, South Korea, Singapore, they brought down even China. Well, if we can believe anything coming out of a autocratic dictatorship, but they brought down the contagion numbers because the people there are not so spoiled and self-centered that they think wearing a mask infringes on their freedom and is taking their life away, and it's some type of new world order plot. Newsflash: it's a disease.
That's it.
Protect yourself against it until we have the proper treatments. But no matter what, there are some people who just aren't going to listen to the scientists. But Tricia, I really want to thank you.
Thank you so much for coming, for illuminating us, edifying us in so many ways. Thank you so much. We'll have all of your links available, but really, truly, what a mind and what a heart. I really appreciate meeting you and talking to you. Thanks for doing everything that you do.
Thank you, Tricia, and to all your listeners, many blessings, and may God guide you.
Amen. Well, I hope you had as much fun as I did talking with Mark Anthony. One of my favorite things that he said in this episode was that if you are able to feel love, then you have the ability to communicate with spirit. And that sums it up, doesn't it? And so be sure to check the description for all of his links. He has lots of media out there, so you could go and find other places where he is talking. And I just really appreciate that you tune into this. And I invite you to like, subscribe, share, comment. And if you're watching on YouTube, if you will click the little bell, then you'll get notifications of when new episodes are posted. Sometimes I'm posting a lot, but at minimum, I have one full episode every week. And so with that, I will say thanks for tuning in. I love you, whoever you are.